Welcome to Our College, Your Voices. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. We have something just a little bit different for you today. Back in December, we invited a colleague from the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, or WICHE, as you'll hear it referred to in the broadcast. Her name is Colleen Falkenstern, and Colleen came to visit with a group of Vice-Chancellors and Workforce Alignment Directors to present on the WICHE Report called Knocking at the College Door. We're going to bring you Colleen's entire presentation, the audio of it here. If you're interested in the slides or a video of her presentation, I will make those available in the Microsoft Teams group. Remember, information on how to subscribe to Teams is available at the end of the show.
It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Before I do that, though, I do want to say thank you. Not only does it take a good bit of coordination on the part of Corey and Russ and Andy and Stacy and myself, as well as Sarah, who has, for this meeting, the lion's share of the work. So Sarah, thank you for that. And also a huge thank you to Michelle Vaughn and Val Romaine, who made sure that we have rooms, that the walls were all where they were supposed to be, which is a lot harder than you might think. And all the projectors were showing the right stuff all the time. And a big thanks to Charlie for his help with that today, too. So big kudos to everybody who has helped to make today work. And I am pleased to introduce our guest speaker. Colleen Falkenstern serves as a research analyst in WICHE's Policy Analysis and Research Unit. In that role, she supports the development of WICHE's annual data resources, which are the regional fact book for higher education in the West, benchmarks of access and success, and tuition and fees in public higher education in the West. Colleen also provides analytical support for WICHE's quadrennial projections of high school graduates knocking at the college door, which is what we're asking her to focus on here for us today. Colleen holds a bachelor's degree in marketing and management from the University of South Carolina, Columbia, and a master's degree in higher education from the University of Denver. Please join me in welcoming Colleen Falkenstern.
All right, so my name is Colleen Falkenstern. I'm very excited to be here with you guys today to talk about our projections of high school graduates from the Knocking at the College Door report. As she mentioned, I am a research analyst at the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, and we put out these projections about every 4 years. And so you'll see that this report came out in 2016, so things are a little bit outdated at this point. We're gearing up for our next set of projections. They're slated to come out at the end of next year. I do have to do some due diligence and thank ACT and College Board for their financial support of the projections of high school graduates. We collaborate with them in the entire data analysis process and planning process. So they are huge stakeholders in the last edition. And lastly, I just want to thank ICAS for having us and having me here today to share this information with you. The slides will be shared on our website, which is knocking.wiche.edu, and then /presentation. So don't feel like you need to take pictures of any slides. I do always feel good when people do that, but you don't necessarily have to. Everything will be made available. A little bit about WICHE, as I realize you guys are not one of our members and may not be as familiar. You may be familiar with the Midwestern Higher Education Commission, which is a similar organization. But WICHE was founded over 65 years ago. We are a regional interstate compact. We serve states from North and South Dakota all the way to the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands and Guam. So we have a very diverse group of states, geographically, demographically, economically. Our role in the region and our mission is to promote access and excellence in higher education for all residents of the West. We do this through regional collaboration, resource sharing, sound public policy, and innovation. So the Knocking Report is an example of our public policy. It is one of the resources that we do at a national scale. Most of our work is very focused in our region, but we do have some projects like Knocking that expand outwards. About the projections themselves, we've been doing the projections of high school graduates for about 40 years. We've had 9 editions. The most recent, as I mentioned, came out in December of 2016. So that's what I'll be looking at today. We do our projections of high school graduates for both public and private high schools for the nation, the 4 geographical regions, the 50 states and DC. And last edition, we were able to include Guam and Puerto Rico in our projections as well. We're able to do public high school graduate projections by race ethnicity. Our data comes from publicly available data at the Common Core data set from the National Center for Education Statistics. also from the Private School Universe Survey. We also observed we observed the number of births each year, which then projects the general youth population trends. The most recent edition took us out to 2031-32. Because we rely on the publicly available data, things are lagged a little bit. So in 2016, and you'll see this when I get into the data portion, the 2016 edition, we had enrollments through 2013-14, and we had graduates through 2012-13. So the projections themselves started in the school year 2013, which at this point is a little bit further behind. And so what we're doing right now, gearing up for the next one, is kind of analyzing the data that's been made available since then. Our methodology that we use is called the cohort survival ratio method. I am not necessarily going to go into too much detail. There's a technical appendix in the full report that provides that level of detail if you're interested. We basically just observe the number of students who progress from grade to grade year over year, starting with birth all the way through high school graduation. So starting with the big picture, the national trends in high school graduates, the big takeaway from the 2016 report was that we've been seeing this increase in graduation rates, but the actual number of youth was contracting. And underlying that contraction was an increase in non-white youth coinciding with decreases in white youth. So what that looks like, this is a 30-year span of high school graduates in the U.S. The actual count of data are in gray. Those are the ones that come from the National Center for Education Statistics, and WICHE's projections are the black line. So as you can see, from 2000 to 2013, there was an increase from around 2.8 million high school graduates to 3.46 million graduates. The number of high school graduates then is experiencing, or we projected to experience, kind of a stabilization around 3.4 to 3.5 million graduates, an increase of about 3% to 3.56 million in 2025. And after that, it's expected that the number of high school graduates in the nation to decrease by about 8% at around 3.25 million at the last year of the projection. So I'm going to break this down. I'm going to look at my notes because I want to get the numbers correct. But I'm going to break this down by population, starting with private high school graduates. So what we use is, in our methodology, we really rely on the most previous 5 years of data, which in 2016, the most recent private high school graduate was through 2010. And between 2007 and 2010, the number of private high school graduates decreased from around 314,000 to 302,000. So that heavily influenced our projections. With the actual data that we had at the time, we projected a 26% decrease in private high school graduates. If you think back, 2007, 2010, as the economy was having a downturn, there seemed to be a decrease in the private sector. There has been more recently released data. We haven't created projections with that, but that's what those dots represent. And so that demonstrates that there's been an influx back into the private sector. So that's positive news for those that attend private schools. As the economy has improved, there's been kind of a resurgence in high school graduates from the private school sector. I will say that at this point, there hasn't been new released public school data, so we don't necessarily have a comparison point of what's been going on the public school side, but this just demonstrates kind of what's been happening in the private school sector in the last almost 10 years now. So for our projections, we are able to do projections for public high school graduates. So this is a trend line by race ethnicity, and these colors are used throughout. So the blue represents white students, green is Hispanic, yellow is Black, Asian Pacific Islander is the gray color, and the orange color is American Indian, Alaskan Native. It's kind of hard to see in the area chart, but a little bit more noticeable in the bar chart. Again, I show the entire 30-year picture because I think that it's important to recognize the difference in the trends from the 2000 to 2010 and then beyond. So from 2000 to 2010, white high school graduates, which were about 1.8 million in 2000, represented 70% of all high school graduates in that year. And as the national total in high school graduates grew between 2000 and 2013, white high school graduates remained relatively the same, but decreased as a share of the total to about 57% in 2013. And over the course of the projections, so starting in 2013, white high school graduates are expected to decrease to about 1.6 million and represent just over 51% of the total at the end of the projection period. Hispanic high school graduates were 290,000 in 2000, which represented about 12% of all high school graduates. As the growth in the national level throughout the projection period really is a result of the growing Hispanic population. Between 2000 and 2013, the number of Hispanic high school graduates more than doubled at the national level, and they're expected to continue to increase in numbers till about 2025, when they'll peak at around 917,000. By the end of the projections, Hispanic high school graduates are expected to be about 25%, so a quarter of all high school graduates. Black high school graduates are expected to remain relatively stable over the course of the projection, somewhere between 13 and 14.5% of the total. They also are expected to reach their peak in 2024, 2025, when the nation is expected to reach its peak in high school graduates. Asian Pacific Islander high school graduates are a much smaller share than Black or Hispanic population, but they are a growing population, and that's across all the states. Also, in a couple of slides, you'll really be able to see this, but they're the only population that's expected to increase in the later years of projections, when most of the other populations are decreasing. American Indian Alaska Natives, as I mentioned, are the smallest population. They represent about 1% of the total. They were growing until about 2010 and are expected to decline over the course of the projections, and the only non-white population to have less graduates in 2031-32 compared to 2000. I do want to make note that there's two racial groups that are not included in this chart, although their students are counted for. So around 2010, there was changes to the classification in the data sets of racial groups, moving to 7. The inclusion of Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, as well as 2 or more race populations. We, due to the lack of the data availability to make the projections, we include Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders in the Asian total, so we go back to a combined total there. We use a formula to take the 2 or more races and kind of disperse them across the other racial groups. So those students are counted for. We just don't have the data at the time of these projections to project 2 or more races, but we're hoping in the next set of projections that we'll be able to do that, because across the states is a growing population. So one way to think about this is a potential switch to a majority minority national, and we don't project that to happen by 2031-32, but this kind of represents the 2 trend lines, and any sort of targeted policies in the high schools to increase retention and student success strategies could potentially increase the number of non-white high school graduates and lead to a potential majority minority over the course of the projections. And the last thing I want to show, because over 30 years, a lot can happen. So this is just the projections period and kind of a way to look at cumulative change. So starting in 2013, when the projections started, the different trend lines across racial and ethnic groups, where between 2013 and 2020, when the number of high school graduates nationally was remaining relatively flat, that was the result of the number of Hispanic high school graduates offsetting the decline among other populations. That slight increase in high school graduates up to the mid-2020s is really the result of increasing number of Hispanic high school graduates. And those later year projections, when the national total is expected to decrease by 8%, you see that that comes across from almost all populations outside of Asian Pacific Islander population. So switching gears into the Midwest, one of the other key takeaways from the WICHE report was the differences across the 4 geographic regions. So the South and the West are considered the growing regions, where there's expected to continue to increase till the mid-2020s, similar to the national trends, where the Midwest and the Northeast kind of get lumped together in the declining regions, which they reached their peak in high school graduates in 2010 regionally and are never expected to increase past that number. So this is what the Midwest looks like, where, similar to the national, the white high school graduates remain relatively the same up until 2010, and then expected to have pretty strong decline. And the Midwest overall is less diverse in the nation, but it similarly is expected to diversify over the course of these projections. The Hispanic population is the growing population in the region, which is expected to increase throughout the projections and go from over by 40%, well, the Asian population is expected to increase by 52% over the course of the projections. The Black high school graduates in the region are expected to decrease by nearly 11% over the course of the projection. But I do want to show this, which gets a little bit at the different trends in the Midwest. Like I said, the Midwest kind of gets lumped together in this decreasing region. However, there are diverging trends across the states in the region. So this is from 2013 to 2031-32. The Midwest total overall is heavily influenced by Illinois, Ohio, and Michigan, which is expected to decrease pretty substantially over the course of the projection. They represent those three lines on the bottom of the chart where they're expected to have double-digit decreases in the number of total high school graduates. Indiana is the bigger line in the middle that kind of fluctuates between some decline, some growth, overall a decrease of about 7%. So somewhere kind of in the middle, actually, in the region. It's not quite at the same level of decrease as the region overall. And then as you kind of look more towards the Great Plains states in the region, they're actually expected to increase over the course of the projection. So I think that it's important, these geographic trends or the regional trends can mask some significant variation across the state. And so now I'm going to get into Indiana's high school graduates, which I'm sure is of more importance to all of you anyways. This provides just high-level picture of the projections and actual counts of high school graduates. So that kind of that 30-year trend again, where total high school graduates is the black line, public high school graduates is the yellow line, and the private high school graduates is that reddish color. So similar to the nation, Indiana has been in a period of growth. That period of growth was projected to increase all the way until 2018, which is kind of interesting since that it's sort of right now or in the past year, where except for after 2018, when Indiana was projected to have about 75,000 high school graduates. It's expected over the next 12 years that Indiana's high school graduates will decrease by about 9%, which equates to 7,000 less graduates over that time period. Private high school graduates are about 10% of the state's total, which is about similar to the national average, and expected to remain relatively stable over the course of the projections, which is quite different than what we saw across the country and in most states where there was sharp decreases in private high school graduates. It's the question was what's the definition of private? It comes from the Private School Universe Survey from NCES. So it does not include homeschool. It does not. It's non-sectarian, Catholic, other religious are kind of like the three classifications. I don't know the exact definition, but I do know that it doesn't include like homeschool. Charter would be under public. Yeah. Sorry, and also feel free if a question jumps out to just raise your hand throughout. There will be time for questions at the end, but I'm fine stopping. Okay, so the increase in Indiana's high school graduates that was through 2018 is across the result of increases across several subpopulations. The white high school graduates in Indiana reached a peak in 2010 at around 54,000 high school graduates. However, during that time, non-white high school graduates increased at a faster rate, and white high school graduates went from 89% of the total to 80% of the total between 2000 and 2013. Between 2010 and 2018, white high school graduates are expected to have some moderate decreases. And after 2018, so during that foreseen decrease that I mentioned in the previous slide, white high school graduates in Indiana are expected to decrease by 12%, so at a higher rate than the state overall, which is around 6,000 fewer graduates, and ended about 70% of public high school graduates in 2031-32. In 2000, there are around 1,300 Hispanic high school graduates in the state, which was about 2% of your state's total. Between 2000 and 2013, Hispanic high school graduates then went on to increase to about 4,600 high school graduates, and that number is expected to continue to grow until about 2025, when the number of high school graduates is then expected to decrease. So the driver of increase in the state's public high school graduates is the result of a growing Hispanic population in your state. Black high school graduates are expected to remain relatively stable over the course of the projections. They're also expected to reach their high point in 2018 and then go back to being relatively stable over the course of the projections. Asian Pacific Islander public high school graduates are a relatively small population in the state, but have very strong percentage increases in your state. So again, the chart on the left shows the cumulative change in the number of high school graduates. You can see that leading up to about 2025, the number of Hispanic high school graduates, the increase in Hispanic high school graduates is about 2 to 1 to the decrease of white high school graduates, so about 1.7 the times the decrease of white high school graduates. So that keeps the number of high school graduates in the state relatively stable, slight decreases, and then the later years of the projections is when you see the decreases across both of those populations, and Asian Pacific Islander remains the only growing population in the state at that time. The other chart just shows percentage change. So when you have a small population in your state, like the Asian Pacific Islander, percentage-wise, that's 161% increase over the course of the projections. Pretty substantial change, as well as an 88% increase in Hispanic high school graduates over the course of the projections. On the other hand, white high school graduates between 2013 and 2031 are expected to decrease by 13%, and the American Indian Alaska Native population, again, a very small number in your state, expected to decrease by about 48%. And that kind of wraps up the projections of high school graduates, although embedded in our methodology is the actual enrollment count. And so what I wanted to do was spend some time looking at what's been going on in the last 10 years in the state, particularly focusing on the high school population and how the demographics have changed across the state in terms of where those enrollment numbers, which we would expect as the graduates are projected to diversify, enrollments will be diversifying as well. Graduates don't appear out of thin air on their graduation day. They're embedded in the K-12 school system throughout the previous 12 years. So what this shows is the share of the population. I broke it up by grades 1 through 5, grades 6 through 8, and then high school. So what you would expect is that the earlier years would diversify before the later grades as individuals enter into kindergarten and then subsequently forward. So between 2005 and 2015, white first through fifth graders went from 80% of the total to 70% of the total. Well, Hispanic first through fifth graders doubled their percentage from 6% of the total to 12% of the total during that time. I also want to highlight that starting in 2010 is when Indiana shifted to those racial categories that I discussed previously. So because these are actual counts, I was able to include the 2 or more race populations. And so that's the red color that starts to take up a share of the total starting in 2010. Similarly, from grades 6 through 8, from 81% of the total white students went from 81% to 72%, while Hispanic population went from 5% to 11%. And between 2005 and 2015, the high school students, the white population went from 83% to 74%, while Hispanic population went from 4% to 9%. Across the board, the Black population has remained relatively the same in terms of a share of the total across all of these grades. And so what I did here was I wanted to kind of look at across your state, where has population been growing and where has population been decreasing? And so this is mapping school districts and change in high school students, public high school students from 2005 to 2015, where the red and orange color signifies decreases. So a deep red would signify a large decrease, and the blue color represents positive, so increases in high school students in those 10 years between 2005 and 2015. So across your state, there's obviously areas that have had strong decreases, particularly Indianapolis Public Schools, which had the largest decrease in high school students, about 3,800 less high school students between 2005 and 2015. While on the other hand, Hamilton Southeastern had the largest increase of nearly 3,000 high school students. And so across the state, different pockets of increases and decreases. However, as you've seen through the projections of high school graduates, the change in demographics is also underlying these total numbers, right? So overall, the state has had over 30,000 less white high school students between 2005 and 2015, while an increase of about 15,000 Hispanic students and an additional, so not additional, but a reclassification of the 2 or more races is about 12,000 high school students. So that particularly is an important population in your state in terms of looking at the demographics overall. So what I did here was start to look at, well, if the districts that were decreasing, what population is decreasing there, or is there growing populations in those districts? So this represents that same map, but now I've broken it down by white, Hispanic, and Black. For the remainder, I kind of just focused on those three populations. We don't have a two or more race population in 2005 to compare it to, so I didn't include them. But otherwise, these are your three largest populations. So I focused on them. So for example, if you look at Indianapolis, which has total decreases, you also see that it has a decrease among the white population and then also the Black population, but they have an increase in the Hispanic population in their high schools. And so overall, several districts within the state have decreased in number of white high school students, while the areas of Hispanic have had some increase, some decrease. It kind of varies across the school districts. And then a lot of school districts for the Black population remain relatively the same. However, decreases, particularly in Indianapolis public schools, Gary public schools, and Fort Wayne public schools. And so then I brought it down one more level, and I looked at the Census Bureau statistical areas, a couple of them in the state, to kind of look at what are the trends in specific areas of your state. So across all of these maps, white or like lighter color is going to mean decrease, and the positive increases are going to be in the darker color. So looking at the Indianapolis Census Bureau and what they deem as the Census Bureau, where I realize some of you may think that these school districts are not part of the metro and they're maybe more rural. I'm not exactly sure. I just went with what Census gave me on this. But you see that the Indianapolis Public Schools, as I've mentioned, is a decreasing school district, but there are areas around the city center, some more potentially the suburban school districts, where there have been increases in high school students. The white population trends fairly similar, where the city centers had decreases in white high school students, while the more suburban school districts around there have had increases, and then a varying degree. And then you look at the Hispanic population and the school districts, almost all the school districts in the metro area have had an increase in Hispanic students. Obviously a wide variety, but they have had increases in the number of Hispanic high school students, where the Black population, the city center has had a decrease in Indianapolis public schools, but the surrounding school districts have had increases in the population from 2005 to 2015. So I would say, especially thinking about those suburban areas where the more outer fringe school districts in the Indianapolis area have not had the same increases that the suburban districts have had. Then I switched gears and I looked at kind of a smaller CBSA in the state. I'm looking at Terre Haute, and where almost all the students are concentrated in one school district. So I included all of the school districts, but there's very small numbers that are there. And so looking at a more rural school district or a different part of the state outside of your main city center, and recognizing that the white population has decreased in there, and as has the Black population, but there have been an increase in Hispanic high school students. Only 73, change of 73, but that in a percentage term is actually fairly significant in the school district. And then I went through like another big CBSA, and I looked at Northwest Indiana, where there are some varying trends in terms of the school districts there, where Gary School District had decreases across all populations. And then specific school districts had different trends, where Lake County had decreases among the white high school students and pretty strong increases among Hispanic and Black high school students. Then you have a school district like Hammond that had a very significant increase in Hispanic high school students in these 10 years, but didn't see that same increase among other populations. So a little bit of a differing trend happening in this area of the state. And I wasn't able to kind of pick up on one type of trend. And I'm assuming you guys probably know that more than I do and have more context to speak to for that. But I just thought that it was an interesting part of the state to look at in terms of potentially migration across school districts or differing populations happening in that part of the state. I also, I think that Fort Wayne and Evansville are important places to look at in your state. They represent a large number of students. They didn't quite map in any type of cool way. And so I just showed them this way. where in Fort Wayne has had a pretty substantial decrease in the number of high school students, about 1,000 less high school students over 10 years, with a decrease of about 2,000 white students. So overall, they've decreased by 1,000, and they've decreased their white students by 2,000. And so any increase has particularly come from the Hispanic population in Fort Wayne, as well as the role of the two or more race category. As not all decreases in white students is that they're no longer enrolled, but they could be reclassified as a two or more race student now. The surrounding school districts have less diversification, but some of them have had increases, whereas Fort Wayne itself has had decreases. Evansville had less of a decrease overall, only about 190 fewer students. However, white students had the largest decrease, about 900 fewer white students in those 10 years. And again, a growing share of two more races in the Evansville School District. So we don't provide any projections by anything beyond race, ethnicity. We don't look at anything by socioeconomic status, but I do like to put in context these projections. Obviously, it's very easy to put charts up about the projections of high school students, but they're students and they're coming to your campus and they have, needs, and they have student support services that are needed. And I think that it's important to look at them beyond numbers and think about who are the students that are coming through, who are the students that are currently enrolled in K-12 schools, and how are our institutions, not only in Indiana, but across the country, adapting to the needs of the students that are coming down the pipeline. And so I just want to end with some kind of column discussion points, column implications, but a way to think about these data and put them into context about the students that you guys work with on a daily basis. So the first thing I wanted to look at was I looked at the share of Indiana youth by the parent attainment level and kind of saw some pretty stark differences across the populations, which is something that probably tracks similarly across the country. I don't necessarily have an analysis for the nation, but it's probably fairly similar. So among the total population, around 41% of high school or of youth have a parent that has an associate or higher degree. That tracks pretty similar to your state's post-secondary attainment, right? White students, a higher share of white youth have a parent with an associate or higher degree, so about 47%. Black students, Black youth, because this includes everyone under the age of 18, 27% have a parent with an attainment, right, or post-secondary attainment, and Hispanic youth, just 20% have a parent with some level of associate degree or higher. So there's some very large differences across the board. It obviously speaks to your adult population, but it also speaks to the youth and the resources, and also just their familiarity or experience with post-secondary education. The other thing I wanted to look at was family income, and so I was able to include two or more races in this one. And the growing population, so if you think whether two or more races is a new population of people, but it is a new categorization of people, and so I wanted to include it, and they would be considered a growing population in your state. So your growing population, two or more races, Hispanic, Black population, we're expecting to see increases in the number of graduates, are also the families that have lower level of income, lower than the median in your state, and lower than the white population, and also the populations that have higher shares of youth that are in poverty, compared to the state, which has an 18% overall, and then the breakdown by subpopulation. I also think that one of the changing demographics in the state is an important takeaway, but there's also this potential decrease in the number of actual high school graduates. So something about the fact that there's less youth that are traditional age coming into post-secondary education. And I think it's always easy to say, well, there's adults. There's adults that can fill this. There's adults that don't have a college degree. And so what do we look like with that? So I wanted to do a little bit of an analysis of what the associate or degree population looks like in your state. So I included the top 10 counties by attainment, and then the lowest 10 counties for attainment, where the suburban counties are more likely to have adults with a post-secondary degree. The more rural counties are less likely to have a student or have a post-secondary degree. And there's significant variation across the state, which is similar to most states as well, obviously. But then the share of population doesn't necessarily tell us there's a population base there of adults who could potentially be a returning adult or new student at a community college. And so I wanted to look at the actual adult population, the actual numbers themselves. And so there's about 1.7 million Indiana adults, 25 to 64, who have a high school degree but no college experience, or have some college experience but don't have a degree. And that obviously varies widely by county. So these are the 10 counties that have the largest population base of those 1.7 million adults. So this would be the areas of the state. Obviously, the more populous counties have more adults that have less of a college degree, but these would be the population centers that would actually have the ability to have students to be recruited or have students that might be interested in attending a community college. So that actually wraps everything up.
Thanks again for joining us on this episode. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. You can connect with me on Twitter at KNM Tweets. You can reach us by email at ourcollegeyourvoices@ivytech.edu. Leave us a voicemail if you have questions or comments about this episode, 317-572-5049. Don't forget, if you're an Ivy Tech faculty or staff member, you can join our Microsoft Teams listener community. And our website is ivytech.edu/podcast. Production assistance for this and every episode provided by Becky Campbell, Sarah Ferguson, and the Ivy Tech Community College marketing team. And our podcast concept is by Matthew Pittman. The music, recording, and post-production services provided by the talented Jen Edds at the Brassy Broadcasting Company. And we will talk to you next time on Our College, Your Voices.